Hey there, fellow simmer. How about a Maxis match, no custom content, huge community lot for today? Sounds good? Let's go then. Like with other lots that will be later reduced in size using lot adjuster, I start off by marking the future boundaries with walls. And the idea is pretty simple. We're gonna have a governmental block surrounded by multiple lots, and this is the central piece, the city hall. And the speed build will be divided into two parts. The first one will cover the build mode, all the challenges that I had to overcome while building the plot itself. And in the second part, we'll take a look at the buy mode, as well as decorate all the rooms that I've created. As you can see, I've already started working on the basic shape of the foundation, and it's raised a bit. But in fact, it's currently the same height as your regular walls. That's because I want to use a lot of modular stairs that will gradually lead to the first floor, and we need some height for that. And the way I did that is I raised the terrain by 8 clicks precisely, and I put a foundation tile on top of it. That gave me the exact height of a wall. Then I just gradually lowered it by 4 clicks, which gave me one handy tile of stairs. I did not have any particular reference image for this. All I knew that I wanted to have an interesting shape that would encompass some kind of an object inside of it. The initial monstrosity is a monstrosity, but trust me, it's gonna get better. Having finished with stairs at the back part, I used 10 by 10 squares to make sure that my build is symmetrical. Then I added the wall parts that will be connecting to other lots next to this one. And I guess I have to apologize for the hectic nature of this build, because normally I approach my builds in a very methodical way. Like I start with foundation, then I proceed to outer walls, stairs, and I kind of do them all together because they interdepend on each other. But this time everything just went in chaos. And I think it kind of worked for the best. Because when I follow a plan, I usually end up with something regular and mundane, but this time I wanted to challenge myself a bit. Having no CC can seem like a rather limiting factor, but trust me, there are a lot of Maxis items that I personally used to overlook. And so this build is my attempt to honor all the cool stuff that there is by default. And without any custom content, it'll be much easier for me to later upload this for public use. So what I'm doing now is I'm replicating the step that I've already done at the backyard, and I'm just making the gradual steps. So I just lowered the terrain by exactly 4 clicks, which gives me the next layer that I can then start at exactly 1 tile away from the previous one. So at first I wanted these stairs to sort of come from inside, but then I took a look at the backyard and I decided to replicate the same octagonal shape here at the front yard too. And while I did not have a reference image, which arguably caused me a lot of troubles, I sort of based my build on my collective impression of St. Petersburg. So what I wanted to end up with is a historically looking building that was probably like a palace or a manor of some sorts, and then throughout years it was repurposed multiple times over and over again, while eventually becoming a city hall for a town. Oh, and this part here is a good reminder for me that you can work with foundations in 2 modes. You can either add new foundation or you can subtract them. And only by combining the two can you get the exact shape that you want. For now it looks kind of weird, an evil fork looking directly at you, but it's work in progress. And since this is a city hall, I wanted to have sort of a balcony or a ramp from which the future mayor could just publicly speak to his audience. And the known part here was the weird elevation. So to fix this, I had to enter the constraint floor elevation sheet, straighten this upper ramp, then put the necessary pedestal, which caused quite a few problems, as you can see. Luckily, those can be pretty easily fixed, and the surprising thing is that the central piece turned out to be looking kind of cool, so I just decided to go with it. Why not? I even went straight to trying out different floors that I could put there, maybe to even emphasize more this slope even more by placing like a plumb up there, but I didn't find anything right away, so I just left this for the future. Instead, I went to making the basic shape for the outer walls because they need to come pretty early on. And that's because of the next step, of course, which is the roofs. Oh my god, the roofs. They aren't as difficult as people tend to believe, but they do come with a fair bit of challenges. However, at this point, I'm just making a huge blob that does not represent anything, so those are yet to come. With this central piece, for instance, I tried to go with maybe a regular triangle shape, but it looked too much like a regular house to me, and I wanted to go for something like classical Greek inspired perhaps, so I wanted to have different columns in there, and because of that I simply decided to delete these side parts and leave these as straight platforms there. I then moved on to creating this shape, whatever this is. It will be changed pretty significantly later on. I then added some floors just to signify where those are gonna be, and I started to work on those, what do you call them? Dormers, that's what it is. I then worked a bit on these platforms here because I wanted to have not only the stairs here, but some functional things as well. And then it was time to move on to the second prominent feature of this build, located at the very front, and those are the gate towers that I envisioned. I guess this was loosely inspired by the Palace Square in St. Petersburg, and particularly these three arches that open up to the huge Palace Square. And I also wanted to replicate the feeling that you get when you pass through this single arch, and you suddenly can see like the entire square and the palace in front of it. Initially, I went for the huge single arch that's gonna be located in the middle, so that you can see this ramp that we've built before, but then it didn't look quite right to me, and so instead I decided to go with the simple two-storied arches. And since the ground in the middle has just become enclosed, that is considered by the game to be a single room, and that's why it's turned black. With the basic shape in place, I then moved on to creating this roof, and then I moved on to adding some more details to the towers that we have now. Bear in mind though that to the sides we are also going to have separate big towers as well, but those will be added later on as separate lots. Oh, and here comes the thing that I now absolutely adore. And by that I mean of course these decorative roof pieces. And so to match the texture, of course I had to go and to replace the roof texture there. I then cut out a little nook for the phone booth and the stuff, and I add 2 more watchtowers at the top. Not really symmetrical, but easy to fix. And I also add this 1 tile square in the middle because I want to be able to place a floor tile at the top too. Naturally, these dormers did not stand a single chance against towers like that at the front, so I'll be replacing these ones with the towers too. Then, all of a sudden, I decided to place this bench in here, but that's probably because I wanted to decide on the accent color that I'll be using throughout this whole build. And it turned out to be blue. Not only because it's my favorite color, but also since you cannot recolor the default phone booth. And it's blue, yeah. Then we're just finishing up with the corner pieces for the towers, and we proceed to choosing the fence that'll be on top of all the roofs on both of the buildings. And to finish up the towers, we place the missing center pieces. Next come windows, and here's where I encounter one of the first issues that's gonna define how this whole building is gonna look. You see, when you have a roof like that, you cannot place a window on top. They're gonna overlap. That's why I removed it and just placed the windows where they should be. Now I'm placing this middle column to ensure that the center part is supported. And that's pretty much a promising start. Moving on to the main part of the building, where we are placing some fences, for safety measures of course, adding 2 more towers at the back. This adds to the feeling of depth. And here's where I realized that since we're gonna have a separate lot next to the backyard, we're gonna need some sort of access to it. So that's why I cut out another arch here at the right part. This is also a perfect place for a public restroom, so if nature calls, this is where you can go. Let's jump to the front part once again, to place this adorable blue door, and I imagine this is gonna lead to some sort of a store. Maybe to sell souvenirs or books, or I don't know. Something to occupy the tourists as well as the regular visitors here. You may notice that few things work out on the first go for me. In my experience, you just fail, and then you try again, you fix it, you try again, you fix it, and you end up with something that is not half bad. Another prominent feature that I wanted to have at the front is this balcony with flowers. I think this window is a perfect fit here. Then I add the pedestal to be able to place the flowers and the fence at the border. We also need more columns to support this whole thing. And then we move on to adding more roof pieces to finish the entire row. At the very top we have straight floor tiles, but what I don't like is how this upper cone part is kind of stuck to the floor. So that's where I decided to add a little gap in there. I believe that the height of a foundation will be more than enough for me, and for that all I need to do is just add 3 wall segments, and that's gonna give me the necessary height. Then I'm just building the gaps themselves. They are basically wall boxes. And now, having entered the constraint floor elevation sheet, I just extend the terrain tool and get to the necessary height. As a result, here's what we have now. In my opinion, looks way better. Then as for the wall coverings, I have decided to go with this plain gray brick. In my opinion, it looks great as the base color. And then we're off to placing these little pieces. Freaking love them, even though they can be a pain in the ass to place sometimes. And then I'll try to make these curly things work, and it turns out that the less you have, the better. This balcony color may look out of place and weird to you, but it's gonna make total sense. I promise. Then we have some sculptures at the top, and I dare say they look pretty freaking awesome. Then we need a couple of columns to add to that classic look that I was going for, and a couple of flower beds at the very front. Once again, I'm going for the blue as my accent color. And it's time now to decide on the brick tiles that we're gonna use at the floor, and also what we're gonna use as the main square piece. I imagine that's where people come to listen to what the mayor has to announce, and whether or not to protest. A fancy public place without fountains is not a fancy public place, so that's why we're putting them here. And we need a huge middle piece there. I went for this amazing octagonal one with the fish at the center. Now I also need to adjust the foundation that serves as the base. And it looks kind of like a trident to me. A couple plain black fences here and there, and for the fountains I had to go with something lower, not to obstruct the black border. So I went with this gray concrete. And here's me working on expanding the left platform, adding some additional stair pieces, and I think that breaks the perfect symmetry even more, which is a good thing. And while we're at the stairs tab, why not add these ones too? And now for the doors. Yes, the doors. I'm not gonna lie, I chose these pretty much right away, and I stuck with them, because they're awesome. So let's just duplicate them a couple of times, place them in all the necessary places. Then I also went for the matching windows, though I will be changing them later on, but, well, we're gonna get to that. Then it was kind of time to decide on what's going to be happening inside, and for the very central part, I decided to make this into the mayor's office. And I wanted it to occupy both stories, so that's why I'm adjusting the wall shape to match what's below it. Then we need to segment off this portion here, which is outdoors. And that's where I encountered the second issue that defined the overall look. Once again, it has to do with windows, because roofs, yeah. Basically what I went for is just the same shape that we have in the front, as well as the raised tower that we have to the sides. Using the same trick with constraint floor elevation, I just lowered the height of the wall a bit, then extended all the way to the other side, and because these parts have different elevation levels, the part in the middle is not touched. So now I'm just adding the missing roof pieces, and as I'm doing that, I kinda realized that we can fit a whole room or two on the second floor. So why don't we just do exactly that? However, since we're now using these slopes, we have to lower the roof as well too, so that we have the lower frame part of the window. And another issue that has to do with windows. You see, there is a minimal wall height that they must be of to be able to fit the window in there. Otherwise, you're just gonna have a wall in the middle of the window. So that's where I go down to the ground level and test it a bit, and it turns out that the minimal height the wall needs to be is 12 clicks. That will be 6 terrain clicks up for the terrain tool, as well as a foundation level on top. And that gives you the 12 clicks that you need to place a regular window. At least that's the way it works with the default walls. Luckily for me, it was pretty easy to fix here because I already have this column that stands on a foundation, and all I needed to do was just raise this whole hill by another 4 clicks. And of course, again, I'm extending the floor level with the constraint floor elevation cheat. But with that done, we can now place any windows that we want. And at first I was browsing through the ones that we have, just not to repeat myself, but then I had to copy the ones that we used at the front, because the rest are 2 tiles. What a bummer. But in fact, it kinda adds to the cohesion, so not a problem at all. Switching to the interior part for a bit, one of the defining features of a fancy cabinet is having a second story library. So that's what I was going for here. At first I did not place these stairs exactly as I wanted because of the windows that I had already in place, but they kind of helped me to envision this layout better. So all I had to do is simply move the stairs 1 tile to the wall. Another thing about no-CC builds is that only a few stairs have a matching fence set that we can use. I was lucky to find these orange-reddish ones that come with an inbuilt column, and that gave me an idea of how we can make this whole room look even more realistic. And that's by placing more columns at the first floor. That way you can have this illusion that the column is just one single beam all across the height of the room. I can definitely see myself repeating this a lot in the future, though we do have to carefully choose which columns to use because some just look way too clunky for this and some are too simplistic. That's why I decided to go for these matching red classic looking ones, just to mirror the look that we have on the outside. And here's the part where I was like, why the hell can I not place the door in these two tiles? Like I can place it here to the side, but not in this nook that was specifically made for it. And I had the same issue on the other side too, and at first I thought that maybe it had something to do with the walls. That's why I moved them, like 2 tiles to the other side, but that did not fix anything. Then I accidentally went 1 floor up, and that's where I got it. The roof was once again in the way. It was decided to simply redo the roof, now using more segments, so I went for the one-sided gabled roof, and I just left out the middle part. I guess I could have considered adding another layer of roof on top, which would also fix the issue, so when you place a roof on the floor above, it removes anything that is below it, and I'll be later adding that to some of the towers. But for this part, I just really wanted to have a straight floor platform at the top, and not have any sort of slopes there. Oh, and here's basically me adding this little piece of roof at the top to remove anything that might appear inside the tower itself. Once you lower it a bit and you hide it behind the roof pieces, it kinda matches pretty well. And while I was at it, I thought, and why don't I connect this upper tower part with the main building? This way we'll break the symmetry even more, and we'll have a lot more space on the second floor. This way we're also adding a bit of variety to how the towers look, thus breaking the symmetry even more and making the build look more interesting. With the fences and floor tiles in place, we can now sidetrack and switch to the public restroom place, which is located in this passage to the right. And first of all, I went for these brick tiles for the floor, and that's because we have a whole set of matching tiles that come with a little bit of variety. Then I chose this yellow concrete for the walls, and I moved on to place some doors inside the building. Then I felt like finishing up the cabinet for the mayor, so I chose the wallpaper. Again, I went for something heavy and rich looking. And for the second part, I just went with the matching one that doesn't come with the sideboard at the lower part. And I also decided to add this little secret to the second floor. A tiny concealed room to speak with those who do not really agree with the way you run your town. We can see some traces of how the interrogation went. The floors and the walls are meant to be very much pragmatic and intimidating. And the uppermost part of the left tower will be a small prison cell to contain anyone who crosses our mayor. Then we move on to something more pleasant, and that is the backyard, the fountain it holds, and some basic landscaping. I really wanted these shrubs to cross the upper platform, so that's why I'm using the pedestal and placing the shrub on it. Then I just added some fences, and we are moving on to landscaping at the front. And here, first of all, I'm mirroring the blue color that we used on the balcony and placing it for the fountain because repetition legitimizes, and now that lonely single balcony doesn't look that odd anymore. To match this even further, at some point I even considered painting this fountain blue, as well as all these platforms the same blue floor tiles. Whoa, what was I thinking? Luckily, I abandoned this idea right away. And to finally decide on what floor to choose, I had to put in the wall coverings first. And I went for the obvious choice, which is just to replicate what I did at the front gate, and that is to go with these nice gray looking bricks. And one particular quirk of mine is that I like to paint the inside of the foundation the same color too. The towers got these nice looking brown stripes for them, and I also painted the inner parts of where the buildings will be connected totally black. That way they are not gonna be looking that odd when we play the lot. With the walls in place now, I could choose these gray tiles for the floor, and that's mostly because of the border that we have for them. Because what I like to do is just segment off different portions of the platform, and I think that's something we do in real life too. Now, this way we show where the steps end so that we don't trip over. Once I finished with this pattern, I then moved on to placing a couple of shrubs here and there, primarily in the places where I could not put these black fence. And placing these shrubs in these particular places kind of forced me to adjust the floor tiles, though I think it was a good thing because it made the whole build look way more natural and organic. A couple of shrubs behind the fountain, and then I accidentally came up with the heart shape here at the front. I don't know why, I don't know how, but hey, why not, especially since it again legitimizes our blue color as the accent. With the shape in place, I then painted the terrain so that it looks natural. And another quirk of mine is that I like to paint the ground below the foundation brown too. This way it makes more sense to me. This soil didn't stay there long because I then replaced it with these nice looking flowers. Then I segmented off these portions with a little fence. And then I switched over to the backyard, basically repeating the same thing as I did at the front. And since I started working on landscaping, I thought it was a good point for me to shrink the lot, just to be able to see where the actual limits are. Because otherwise I could accidentally put an object there, and the lot adjuster would then give me an error. Speaking of which, there wasn't nothing fancy, I just shrunk it by 10 tiles from left and from right. Simple as that. Having shrunk the lot, I then placed a couple of sculptures at the backyard, some of them surrounding the fountain at the center, and then I had a lot of fun raising the terrain to the necessary height for the shrubs to go where I wanted them to go. At first I had to measure the level to which I wanted to raise the ground, and then it was simply using the constraint floor elevation cheat, placing the shrubs. The cheat of course caused a couple of issues, but nothing serious, it was pretty easy to fix, just extending the floor to a couple of tiles, and it was all done. A few more fancy looking shrubs on the ground level, then a couple of rose bushes right next to the windows, and then it was necessary for me to think of how this lot will be connecting to the one next to it, which is going to be a separate huge park. So for that I decided to add a couple of fences with the textures that will be used a lot in the park, so this way they merge a lot cleaner in my opinion. Then a couple of arches and columns to add even more to this feeling of cohesion. And that's where I suggest we wrap up with part 1. Join me in part 2, where we are gonna decorate this entire lot, as well as take a couple of cinematic shots. See ya!